I've been in your shoes more than once. I know what you're going through, not just as someone who is a student who's trying to figure out, where you can go in your lives, but also I used to teach at both Sydney Uni and UNSW, so I understand kind of the arguments that you guys are getting from your professors, and not all of them are passionate about space, so everybody's going to tell you to kind of gravitate towards their personal passions, which might not be space. So sitting at UNSW, you might be feeling, you know what, this isn't really an industry. I'm here to kind of unpack what the industry actually is for you. So at least you can make a decision as to whether you want to join it from a position of knowledge. And I'll tell a little bit. This is kind of unstructured, but the way it's going to go is I'm going to tell a bit about my own history, how I got into the space industry. I'll talk a little bit about the Australian space industry as well. I had a lot of work to help, with things like the space agency and et cetera, and take any questions that you guys have. This is an open forum, Chatham House rules. Total sensing session. You could talk and ask questions about anything that you want. Any embarrassing question, I'll tell you what I had for breakfast, I don't care. Actually, I didn't have breakfast, so I'm drinking tea. Short end of a long story is, how many of you want to be in the space industry as opposed to UAVs or robots, things like that? Hopefully all of you. Some of you are not quite sure. You raise your hand if you like it, but you're not quite sure. Okay, a few of them. It's not to embarrass you. It just gives me a sense of you and where you're at. If you're not quite sure, and at the end of the day you choose not to enter the space industry, it's okay, right? I mean, there's plenty of people that will. There's plenty of people that won't. It's your lives. You have to choose your own direction for your own lives. For me, I wanted to be in the space industry since I was 5 and saw Star Wars. Right? It's as geeky as that. And I have to own up to that sometime. Growing up in the United States, nobody tells you you can't do it, which is the big difference between Australia and the United States, and students in Australia versus students in the United States. Australian students are told they can do it. American students are told they can do it. Australian students are told, nah, you can't do it. I've seen people who have a little more silver in my hair stand up into crowds at AYA and groups like that and say, if you want to be in the space industry, you have to move to the States. It's complete bullshit. That's the first thing I want you to understand. It is 100% complete, unadulterated, unwashed bullshit. Okay, and I mean this with every fiber of my being. All right. My own story was I barely graduated high school. I went to a military school in the United States called Virginia Military Institute, and I graduated and I was commissioned as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army in the field artillery. Not a very technical field in the Army, basically a grunt, a lieutenant of grunts, but still kind of grunt, right? Yeah. Deployed to Germany, to Bosnia, to Korea, all these places. But I always kind of had that secret love of space in the back of my head. I always wanted to do it, just never thought I was able to. Okay, so I was in a mud pit in Bosnia, bored out of my skull, because when you enter a place like that and things are a little bit rough, after a while things get less rough. And the less rough things get, the less you have to do. And at the end of the day, things are going to be okay when you're sitting there bored. Some academic books just for fun and teaching myself. Some of the classes I didn't do very well in. I wanted to just do it for fun, and studying physics and chemistry again, and started coming up with my own ideas, which is another aspect of it. For me, I was a late bloomer academically. I didn't really do very well in school, even though I tried very hard. It wasn't for lack of trying. I was studying. I was pulling in the assignments. I was getting C's and D's, which for you guys is like passes and credits, kind of thing. And that was just because I wasn't memorizing very well back then. You know, everyone's brain works differently, right? When I was, and I also gave myself a lot of pressure, which a lot of young people do, to perform in terms of grades. You know, if you're not getting good grades, you say you're not going to succeed in life, and everybody tells you if you don't have good grades, you're not going to succeed in life. It's half true, but it's half not, right? Just because you know, I wasn't succeeding then doesn't mean I won't succeed later. I didn't realize that, but you know, when I was sitting in that mud pit, I was reading these books and coming up with my own ideas because I wanted to kind of tinker a little bit, and I found out later that some of these ideas were other people were also finding the same ideas. Things like ion drive propulsion and morphable, all these kind of, you know, high tech at the time. This was back in '98. These were some very high tech ideas back then. You know, ion drives weren't really commercialized back then, and it gave me the confidence to say, you know what, maybe I can actually do this after all. And you know, doing the assignments on my own without pressure from a teacher or without pressure from myself, without anybody watching, was actually much better. So I decided that I was going to give the space industry a go. At the same time, my commander, well, at the same time, the Army decided to have a space program with Army astronauts and with an Army space command. Okay, so each service had its own. The Navy had a space command, the Army had one. Each had their different jobs. The Army one was to handle space for the Army, which they have some mission that requires space. And so I asked for a transfer, and my commander said, "Transfer? Are you crazy? You're in the ground force." This is exactly how they all talk, like they're Gene Hackman or something like that. You know, "Are you an idiot? You're in the ground force." So I resigned my commission. I quit my job. I moved to Colorado, where there were other space companies happening, and I started getting jobs. First job was a test engineer for a biomedical company, not even a space company. Yeah, that job I did for about a year. And I was being paid $15 an hour to be I was being paid $15 an hour, and they were billing me out to the customer at $115 an hour. That's how the game was played in the States, right? They're pimping. But that's how it worked, and I kind of knew that they were doing that, but I didn't mind. I was getting paid doing some fun engineering stuff, a little insulin pump for diabetics. But it wasn't space, which is what I really wanted, so I stuck it out until I found a space job that I wanted. I was a test engineer now for the International Space Station, making a module for the ISS, and this is back in 98, 99. And a year after that, the company sold their office in Boulder, Colorado, and they said you have to move to Colorado Springs, and so I quit that job and got another one for Ball Aerospace, writing flight software for the Hubble Space Telescope, one of the cameras on the Hubble Space Telescope. I got to tell you, like, once you get the ISS and Hubble on the same CV, you're going to get passed around like a joint. It's pretty much anything you want to do. It's a ticket to ride, my friends. It's a ticket to ride. But nowhere in my mind was this idea that I couldn't do it. All right? Nowhere in my mind, once I decided I want to be in this industry, was the idea that somebody else who was not me was going to tell me, you can't do it, you're Australian. You can't do it well. In my case, they were saying, yeah, you can't do it, your grades aren't good enough, right? But the same story holds true for you all as well, right? So I was working on at Ball, and September 11th happened, and I got called back into the military, but because I had all these experiences, they put me into Space Command, which is where I wanted to be. Right, and applied to be an astronaut. I was selected as one of the Army's selectees to be forwarded up to the astronaut program, which basically means that I hadn't committed any crimes, that I had reasonable health. It's nothing that I brag about too much, but I obviously didn't make it to being an astronaut because I'm here. But at the end of my tour with Space Command, I ended up being one of their lead trainers. And I was halfway through graduate school as part of the program, and they said, if you want to get promoted, you need to continue your graduate school. And if you want to be an astronaut someday, you definitely got to have a PhD in there somewhere. They said, where do you want to go? And so I applied to multiple programs. I got turned down from Purdue. Purdue laughed when I applied. They took one look at my grades and they're like, hey, you're not getting in here. No way. I got accepted to, I got turned down by 2 programs, and I got accepted to two programs. I got turned down by Glasgow. Glasgow's got a pretty good program, actually. But I got turned down because the exchange rate with the US dollar versus the British pound was very bad. That's why they turned me. It had nothing to do with my grades. It's because I had Hubble and ISS on it, ticket a ride, right? I got accepted to Sydney Uni and to University of Southern California. USC's got one of the best rocketry programs, conventional, like big thrust rocketry programs. And University of Sydney has one of the top robotics labs in the world. And I said, all right, go to Sydney Uni because I hate LA and Australia looks like a cool place to be for a couple of years. And I was only planning to be here for 2 years. I came here for that master's program and ended up with a PhD and a wife and never left. Okay? And I told my wife when we were getting married, living out at Manly Beach at the time, and I said, listen, I want to start this space company. I didn't have a name for it. And I want to apply some of the things I learned in my graduate degree and solve some of the problems I saw as a space operator at both with Hubble on the, seeing some of the things they had to deal with and solving some of the problems I saw at Space Command. I think we could do it. She says, is this going to make money? I said, is it going to make money? She says, it's going to make a lot of money. I said, is it going to make gazillions? How naive. And I said, but we can only do it in the United States because in Australia, there's no market for it. Nobody's buying space products. Remember, this is 2007, right? Totally, it was like the dark ages in Australia. And she said, well, she graduated a year before I did, kind of like Big Bang Theory. She studied pharmacology. I was a space engineer making a space toilet. You guys don't know that reference? The Wallowitz reference? Thank God. All right. So that's what we did. She earned the big bucks and paid our way, and I was basically working out of my little apartment in Manly Beach, coming up with new products, doing my own development. I gathered some co-founders from some of my friends that I work with on Hubble and Space Command and this type of stuff, and founded Saber Astronautics. And we struggled for a few years because the things that we were trying to build were much further ahead, and the Australian market really was not very healthy at the time. And a funny thing happened in about, at Sydney Uni, I tried to sell it to Sydney Uni, which was a great conversation, because I said, listen, this is going to be great for CubeSats. And they said, what's a CubeSat? I said, well, CubeSat's a spacecraft, and instead of costing $1.6 billion for something the size of a Greyhound bus, which is a Hubble, right? It's the size of a toaster, which would cost maybe $150,000, which you could raise through a startup, like a Kickstarter or something like that, and get it out the door, right? And they said, oh, well, that's a cool idea. How many? What's the total market for these things? How many CubeSats? I said, well, there's only 20 CubeSats in existence at the time. So, and they said, there's no market in there. So no, we're not going to, you can do whatever you want with it. And that's how I got to have Saber's Tech without the university opening it, because they turned me down. So with that, we've been able to build this company the way we built it. We got very little investment, I think $20,000 on a friends and family round. And that was for our first project, which was the Space Beer project. Have you heard of that? We partnered with the Four Pines Brewing Company to make a beer you could drink in space. We did this back in 2009. The Wallstock Space Beer. Yeah, you a beer drinker, I guess, or
yeah, I haven't tried space beer. But
if you drink the Four Pines Stout, that is the same recipe that we use for the space beer.
Okay.
Right, the carbonation level is a little different. but we parabolic flight tested this on the Vomit Comet. So I got to drink beer on the Vomit Comet. It's the most fun I've ever done in science. And the story was back in 2010 when we released it, was one of the top, it was the top science story in Australia for 3 days in a row. And that's how we had all those interns applying for us. And we built an internship program that now gets about 150 applicants a year. We got a lot of notoriety for it. Notoriety could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. When you do a new project yourself, you're going to have people who love it, you have people who hate it, and you never know who these people are going to be in that. So you just have to drive through and do the projects you love. But remember, this was a time when everybody was saying you can't do space. Andrew Dempster, your professor, right? You guys know Andrew Dempster, right? How could you be BlueSat and not know Andrew Dempster? He is your space professor. All right, your homework at the end of this is to knock on Professor Dempster's door. He's in the electrical engineering department. He is the guy that does space for UNSW. Okay? Naomi Safnat, you know Naomi? Okay. I am shocked. I am absolutely shocked. You are like the lost children. All right, get to know those two. Who's teaching space at UNSW?
There's a couple of professors. There's like Manoj Aswati. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah, Manoj and Naomi teaching the orbits course.
Yeah, Naomi does pretty good with the orbits course. Good friends with Naomi. We used to be neighbors, right? He's a good person. I don't know the other person. Maybe they're good. I don't know. But you need to align your program, BlueSat. If you say BlueSat, you're doing satellites, right? BlueSat, not Blue Rover. Rovers are for people who are too afraid to go into space. That's what rovers are for. I'm just going to say it. That's what rovers are for. I've seen how a lot of people handle space in Australia for a long time. 2008 to 2014 were the dark ages. There was no money. Actually, that's not true. Australia as a market spends, because I know I should be talking about no longer a pipe dream. In fact, it was never a pipe dream, by the way. It was only difficult. All right. The idea of a pipe dream means that it can't be done. Okay, so a pipe dream is like you're dreaming on acetate. Okay, it was never a pipe dream. All right, but you had a lot of things against you. The people who were telling you can't do space at AYA, like showing up at these conferences and standing up in front of hundreds of you saying you can't do space, they're paid lobbyists. They're paid lobbyists that are supposed to tell you these things. Because if you build a space industry yourselves, they lose money. Okay, how much money? Right now it's about $4 billion a year. Okay, that number's about to triple. Okay, and I'll explain that in a bit. When I was starting off with you, Australia was spending $2 to $3 billion a year on space. That was the expenditure. So when people say you can't do space, the numbers don't match. The evidence doesn't match. Okay. What was happening was these big companies were coming in to meet the Australian need and sending that money back to the United States. And they come into a meeting with you guys and they say you can't do space, you have to do it in the US, because they know you're just as smart as the US grads. In some areas you're a bit smarter, in some areas you don't have the skill. The areas you're smart at, computer science, IT, raw engineering skills, you're very, very good at your raw engineering skills. You might not have had a really good class on spacecraft design, okay? But these things are easy to teach. Teaching you the fundamentals of engineering is hard, okay? So they're telling you these things because they want to see you go back and fill in the project so that they can then turn around to the government and they can then say, well, look, we've hired Australians. Here they are in the projects in the United States. Meanwhile, you're getting green cards, getting citizenships, and you're not coming back to Australia. So for a good 6 years, we were in the middle of this big brain drain in Australia. That changed because of CubeSats. Because now CubeSats are bootstrappable. You can actually raise $150,000, and now it's a little more expensive. 200K is kind of what you need now, maybe 250. But you can still have your CubeSat project, and you can still start your company with these CubeSat projects. All right. So let's go around the room and just talk about some of the companies that you guys might have heard of. I'm just gonna ask for some volunteers, or maybe I'll call on you.
Gilmore.
Gilmore. Innovore. What else?
Spiral Blue.
Spiral Blue. All right, the next one. Easy answer. All right, name some of the ones that you know are making money today. They are making money, actually. What are they making money from? Grants. They're making money from grants, and they have money from investment. Okay, so in getting an investment is not the same as making money from a customer. All right, think of companies that are making money from customers today. Who's manufacturing spacecraft? You mentioned Universe. Somebody mentioned Universe. Right. Who else? You mentioned Universe. Who else?
Space machines?
Space machines. They're not manufacturing anything yet.
Okay.
Don't just think Australia. Think internationally. Think of everyone.
Space.
Learn your industry, everybody. All right. This right now, what I'm seeing is a hobby group, and what I'm telling you is you could do it differently. I'll tell you another story. So when I was a PhD student at the ACFR, I got a bunch of friends together and said, oh, we have these degrees which say aerospace and mechatronics, but if you got a degree that says aerospace, you need rocketry as part of that, right? How could you have a degree in aerospace that does not have rocket experience? So I said, we are going to learn rocketry. So I posted little signs up, started a uni club, the Rocketry Society, Rocket Sockets in the uni. So you've heard of these guys, right?
I'm from UC.
You're from
Yeah.
Oh, I thought this was a.
It's a mix. It's a
Oh, right. All right, so UCID, I founded UCID with a couple of friends of mine that ended up, this is one of the motivations to starting Saber, actually, because when we founded the Rocket Sock, we started with these little Estes model rocket kits. Y'all ever done that? As youths, as youngins, youths, right? See the movie My Cousin Vinny, you'll get that joke. It's a very 90s movie, right? But it's a brilliant movie, you'll love it, right? So we used to make these little model rocket kits. You can get them at Hobbyco, and it comes with these little solid rocket boosters. And we used to go out in the field, we'd go for sausage sizzles. We'd make money off of sausage sizzles, things like that, normal uni stuff. And we'd launch them. And then we did that for a couple months just to kind of get our heads around what launching a little rocket's like and the fundamentals. We said, all right, let's make something which has a little bit of salt to it. Let's solve a problem that nobody else has solved. And so we decided to make a premixed rocket engine. Okay, now premixed rocket engine is quite interesting because normally if you're going to do a rocket engine, you're going to have a fuel, an oxidant, and then you're going to have a nozzle. Sorry, you're going to have an injector, which has got a whole bunch of little lines. You might have some pumps in here, and pump bed's going to come out of a whole bunch of different lines like that. It's very complex. Machinery's up there, and then you're going to have a combustion chamber, and then you're going to have your nozzle, right? And what happens is there's a lot of complexity up here, right? And I wanted to say that if you want to make a better engine, maybe you could find ways to reduce its weight. You reduce weight and you're improving your rocket engine. So it's not a fundamental change in the way we do rockets, but it's a big one. So typically that combustion chamber is got to add a bit of mass. So I said, let's change that, and let's get rid of that combustion chamber, and let's have a premixed rocket engine up here. So we had an injector, which is much simpler. You still got the lines like a shower head. Like if you look at it from the side, you've got basically holes like a shower head. So much simpler to manufacture. A premixed chamber over here with basically two pipes, right, from the fuel and the oxidant, replacing all that stuff. And instead of that combustion chamber, you can just have a much smaller, to complete the burn, much smaller combustion chamber, and then a nozzle like that, right? So the nozzle's the same size, right? But you just reduce the mass for all these things. Okay, so the problems with these is much more dangerous because now you're mixing your fuel and your oxygen here, and then you're lighting it. The force and the speed that is going through these pipes has to be faster than the reaction, otherwise you're going to detonate, which is the problem with these. But there's only 3 of these that have ever been made in the world. Okay, at the time, I don't know what the state is now, but at the time, premixes were very uncommonly attempted, and we did this, and we formed a little marketing group and got sponsorships from Australian Defence. Because we were doing something really cool and interesting that required some academic salt, that required us as students to try and tackle something that uncovers one of those gaps in human knowledge and build something in a new and interesting way. We had all these students who ended up being one of the largest student groups on campus. That's the history of your group, right? And you never, this is back in 2006, 2007. The graduates of this, when we got money from Australian Defence recruiting, that's where the money came from. Right? They were like, they looked at the numbers of students, they were like, oh, we're giving you cash, right? and the moment that happened, our professors got terrified. He said, you're going to do what? How do we know that you can pull this off? What credentials do you have that you could do it? Hubble, ISS. I actually handed them my military ID with all. I had a little card that listed all the weapon systems that I fired when I was a youngling, and they couldn't shoot it down. So I said, I'm going to do this with or without you. And they got even more scared, so they said, okay, if you do it with us, if you give us the money, we will give you an entire laboratory. We're going to give you 2 classes to teach. And that was their special project classes. I don't know if they teach them anymore. One was a spacecraft design class. I think that was kind of already there that we uplifted. I think Xiaofeng Wu teaches that now.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Space flights now, like space engineering.
Yeah, we have 3 space engineers.
Right. And the other one was that lab is now run by Xiaofeng Wu's lab. Okay, so that lab was given to us after that. So that's the history. So we got out of that saying, oh, starting up something from scratch, it's not as hard as I thought. I think I'll start Saber Astronautics, and off we went. So the way the industry changed in 2014 was because the spacecraft were so cheap and bootstrappable. A lot of people in California were starting their companies and getting VC funding, and getting that VC funding fairly quickly. And the valuations were really high. Like if you get a bunch of students like yourselves to do your student CubeSat, and then you pitch it to an investors, and they help you learn how to go from that satellite to customers, and then you go from a $250,000 seed to a $5 million Series A in about a year between those 2 time points, right? And then they bring more expertise, and then you go for 20 million. Australia was a little bit slow to start that, but because the market conditions were so much better, you had a path to doing it that was not including the military acquisition channels at $2 billion. By then it was $3 billion a year. The government realized something was going on before you knew it. You had 90 new companies within the span of 3 years, which included Innovor and Skycraft and Fleet and Gilmore and Black Sky and Moonshot and all these companies basically starting off like you all as undergrad students or postgrad students saying, what do I do with my lives? I want to be a Jedi like my father, right? Simple as that. And that was the trigger for the government to turn around and say, we need a space agency. Because before then, every year had been Andy Dempster, who you all need to meet, standing up at every conference saying, all the problems that you have and you don't have any money is because we don't have a space agency. Well, now here we are. It's 2021, we have a space agency. We also have Defense Innovation Hub, which is a funding mechanism from Australian Defence, NGST, another defense mechanism, Advanced Manufacturing, AMGC, the space agency now has got different funding mechanisms. And Australia is now spending, let's see if we can't actually map this out, see if we can't write it down, how much. Has anybody ever done that? Everyone actually added up how much money Australia is spending in space in here? You guys know? Let me paint a picture for you then. All right. So you got 2 different ways of getting funding. You've got uni academic, and you've got business. Okay. University academics are ARCs, Australian Research Council, and you have CRCs. cooperative research centers. These will probably be about 2 million each, but they could be smaller if you want to do a smaller project. CRCs are typically 200 million. They're big projects, right? All of these require companies to put money in. You need money to make money with these. And if you're a professor, then the game is you make a small amount of money and then you come back and you leverage it. You say, all right, here's my matching funding from another grant, and the rules are where those are legal and where those are not, and you're going to follow it. Business, you've got Defense Innovation Hub, and that goes from 250K to about 4 million. And this is all Australian, by the way. This is all Australian. You have to have a company to do these. You have to have an ABM to do these, right? You got NGST, which is about the same. Okay, and you've got Australian Space Agency. 4 million. And space agencies are much smaller, like anywhere from 150K, but also up to, depending on the project, like Saber got the $6 million grant for the Mission Control Center in Adelaide, right? You know, that's about as high as I've seen them, but typically you could expect it'll go up to 1 million for projects. And these are specifically space projects made by Australians that actually fly. All right, I'm going to say that again. Australian space projects that actually fly. These are defense projects related to space. They're defense projects, so you're competing with other defense projects, but they specifically want space as well, okay? And then you've got advanced manufacturing, AMGC, and these are anything up to 1.6 billion. All right, these add up to 8 billion. So you've got just under $10 billion that Australia is spending over the next few years on space. So what are you going to say when a professor comes up to you or a lobbyist comes up to you and says you can't do it in Australia?
Get soft.
Say it a little louder, please.
Get soft.
You can be nicer about it. I used to say that. I used to go to government and say that. I used to stand in front of government and say, you know, I wouldn't say get stuffed. But, you know, obviously people who are thinking back in 2012 type mentality and still talking in a 2012 type mentality are not accurate for the way conditions are today. Okay, and that's the important bit I wanted to kind of share with you all. Yeah, obviously, if you want to build a startup out of what you are doing, then we have some mechanisms that are going to help. Like the Wolfpack Space Hub is the only incubator in Australia where space people are allowed to be space people. One of the problems that we found, and one of the reasons why Saber never got investment, is because when investors started paying attention, which is back 2014, 2015, like we pitched multiple times. We're really good at pitching our business. Back in 2010, we made the top round for the Tech 23 conference, which is where you get 500 investors sitting in a room here in Sydney, right? In 2012, we made the finals of the Space Business Plan competition in the States. And it looks good, you feel good, right? So, look, I made the top of these pitches. We were the deal of the month for Space Angels Network back in 2014. But we never made any of that money. And the reason why was because at the time, the investors didn't understand space in Australia. The Australian investors looked at it, they were kind of interested, but didn't know what to do with it. And they would ask me questions like, can you explain your product in the form of a web app? And I would say, no, it's not a web app. And then they would leave. They would gravitate. I was watching some startups get seed funding, and then immediately the investors would push them into being a UAV company. And the logic was quite sound. And understand, I don't fault the logic of these people. The logic was, going into space is hard. Let's do it easy first. Put it on a UAV. Put your sensor on a UAV. Fly around a bit and get some customers. and then make sure that you can make some money, then we'll build a spacecraft later. And that's a sound logic if you're an investor looking for a little bit of a gain, but it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because if you want to be a space company, you need to actually fly, right? You need to actually fly. And as they were doing these to space companies, turning them into UAV companies, I was watching American companies simply put a spacecraft in space, get some data, and become global right away and scalable by a factor of 100 compared to a UAV company. I was watching it happen. Spire is a good example. All right, when you get a chance, look up a company called Spire. We pitched with Spire. So Saber Astronautics and Spire both made the finals together in the business plan competition that we were in 2012. The Americans wouldn't invest in either of us. Actually, we both lost the pitch. We both ended up being successful. The company that won the pitch failed after a year in comparison. It happens, right? You don't have a crystal ball, you make your best bet. It happens. But the point of that is, you as students have all this opportunity right now that's literally right here. The Americans would not fund Saber Astronautics because we were too much of an Australian company. The investor wanted us right down the road within choking distance. If you're going to put $150,000 into a company, you want that CEO founder within choking distance. So if they do something wrong, you can help them. You can adjust their sales. So that's it. Saber's strategy throughout the whole point was to build a technology that was further future leaning than others, because we wanted to get customers at the end of the day. And that's exactly what happened. Around 2014, when we didn't make that pitch, we said, all right, it's time to stop being a research group and going for pitch, and let's just go for customers. And we just took the product we had at the time, which was a very early stage alpha release for our mission control software that you saw downstairs. And we just we built a sales internship, and we started selling to universities and going for students like yourselves, and made the price for the software $15 a month, pay as you go, so it was really cheap. And we made some sales that way, but nothing big. But the fact that we were doing it meant we were talking to customers, and we were doing it locally, and we were engaging with people. And as the market grew, eventually, some of these startups that we were helping out, and some of the students were creating their startups, they came back to us and said, we need mission design support, and we need help getting us out there. So one of those companies was Fleet. We did their spacecraft design and mission design using their seed funding. And you hear Flavia say, yeah, we just gave Saber our entire seed round, and it's not quite true, actually. But they gave us a good chunk of change to build out their mission, which we did in our software. And when that released, they earned $5 million in investment. So it's kind of like a snowball. When you first make a snowball, you just get a little bit of a snowball, and then you roll it in the snow till it builds and builds and builds. And the more that you do, the more of a corporate CV you build, the more success you get, the bigger it gets, until everybody knows you can do the things that you say you can do, and you build that trust, and then they start working with you. And that's how it works. And the space industry now in 2021, the government is convinced that space is something we're going to do. You can see it in the amount of dollars they're putting down. They want us to build spacecraft now, because what they don't want is they don't want an overseas manufacturer to come to Australia and build it for us. They want us to build it ourselves. So while the 2013 space policy, written by the Space Industry Association, by the way, says we won't do spacecraft and won't do rockets, now the conversation's completely changed. So we have to do our own rockets in Australia now. We have to build spacecraft in Australia now, because this is a $420 billion market internationally that's about to triple in the next 10 years. Okay, and I want you, when you mention the space companies, and you're saying, oh, you think about the space companies you hear about locally, which is good, but I'm pushing you to look internationally so you could see the lay of the land. Okay, you've got 2,000 spacecraft in human inventory right now. That is going to more than triple in the next 10 years. You're going to have at least 20,000 spacecraft by the next 5 years. 600 spacecraft are being built through VC-funded ventures in Australia alone. 600. Can you imagine? We have 2,000 spacecraft in orbit in human inventory today, and just in Australia we got 600 that are being built today. How many of you are building a spacecraft right now? You need to get started. You're late to the party. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose any of you to rail core or to finance, which is where really good UNSW students go to die. And when I was teaching, I used to hand out, McDonald's. I wasn't a great teacher. I was really kind of snarky. No, joking aside, I want to see you into this industry. You need to drop the rover. Unless you want to be RoverSat, so Blue Rover. You can be Blue Rover, that's cool. You got a lot of good professors that do rovers. You got some real world-class skill at rovers. But if you want to be part of this industry from a position of where it's actually going, you need to start building your spacecraft today. And you need to start thinking creatively about what you can do to make things better, to change the industry for the better, to contribute. Because before you know it, you're going to be graduating and getting jobs and starting your own businesses. And you're going to want to be in a position where you can contribute. And so all this passion that you have towards this industry is not a pipe dream. It's only a pipe dream because you've decided already that it's not for you, that you're not good enough, that it's something other people are better skilled at doing, that you're too afraid to make mistakes. And what I'm trying to tell you is that you can actually do these things. The mistakes you make, everybody makes. Make them early. Make them while you're young, right? And get into it right away. With that, I want to take a pause and see if you have any questions at all, if there's any way I could help you. What are your thoughts?
Great talk so far.
Guess I'll go for a question. So I'm a mechatronics student, so I'm basically not any of you. Judging by the room, everyone seems to be aero. You're very adamant about your focus on space and launch capabilities versus rovers.
Mm-hmm.
With that in mind, right? Because mechatronics is primarily like robotics and stuff. Where do you see sort of technological capability, or like where I can fit into the the space scene that's not putting aircraft in the air?
Yeah, I can speak to this quite cleanly. I used to be you, right? I mean, I was a computer science undergrad.
I do computer science as well.
Yeah. So, and I went through that same struggle. I didn't learn chemistry, so why should I do rockets? It turns out you could learn chemistry later. I would say control systems, you need them for rockets. In fact, when I talk to these rocket companies, they start off saying, I'm going to make a big dumb rocket. That's why it's going to be cheaper, and then they learn very quickly, no, when you get some really high intense pressures and temperatures on things, you need a really good control system. In fact, I removed it. That rocket engine I showed you, the top mechatronics honors thesis at Sydney Uni was the guy who did the control system for that rocket, because getting the motors to do what you want it to do is not an easy problem at the rate and fidelity you need. So that's definitely an area you could do. I mean, he's now the director for Saber USA, that guy. So that's another thing. At that rocket stock, like all of us ended up doing some pretty cool things. Like half of them ended up at Rocket Labs, and the other half founded their own companies. Some ended up at MIT. The guy that debunked the Mars One project from MIT, Sidney Doe. Look up the name Sidney Doe. He was another rocket stock guy. But I mean, that's the answer. Is flight software as well as a computer. Like remember, I got my start in testing. Like your career path as a space engineer and someone who learns mechanical engineering versus someone who learns software are pretty similar at the early days, right? You're going to start off a flight software. A test engineer is like a entry level. You could be an associate space engineer with a software degree. And that's like a graduate engineer, similar, very similar. The Americans call it associate, you guys call it graduate. And the next level up is flight software engineer. And that could be on the ground systems or on the space systems. A lot of very similar problems. You could be designing the command and data handling subsystem. So have you all had a spacecraft design class? None of you.
First.
Your first year? Okay. You have time. I was gonna be like, holy shit. How many of you are third year? Oh, not many. Okay. See, oh, all right, no rush. No rush. When you get your spacecraft design class, pay attention to all the different subsystems and how they work together. Every one of them is going to need some software, everyone's going to need mechanical, everyone's going to need different things. And that's the answer, right? Mechanical engineers, you're going to learn SolidWorks, ANSYS, and you're going to be doing mechanical design for a few years. Then eventually you're going to start doing more design work and getting away from the CAD. Then you're going to be doing more systems work. And then you're going to have to, after about 5 years, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be in a leadership track or a principal engineer track. Okay? You don't have to worry about any of that now, but just to give you a sense of career paths in the space industry, end up being the technical track, principal engineer, you're the one who's coming up with brand new things. The leadership track is you're answering emails and doing talks like mine. Okay? Which I missed the technical side of it. Eventually I try to go back into it. Any other questions? Does that answer your question, by the way?
That was a great answer.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So if we were to start a business in the space industry,
Yeah.
how can we attract investors?
Do you want investors or do you want customers?
Or
You want customers.
okay.
Okay? In order to get an investor, you need customers. In order to make money, you need customers. That was the lesson we had to learn the hard way. Okay? We spent years looking for an investor, didn't win it. If you have customers, investors will come. The moment we started getting customers, investors started knocking on our door. The first thing you want to do is understand the direction you want to do for your company. What is it your company is going to be? When you decide that, you want to gather some friends. Okay? I call it a secret society of friends who rule the world. If you look to the left of you and you look to the right of you, if you do life right, you're going to know. You look to the left, look to the right, right? You're the next generation, right? And your careers are going to follow each other. Okay, you're all going to graduate roughly the same time. Some of you might be a little bit later. Doesn't matter, right? And what's going to happen is some of you, when you start your business, you're going to look to your circle of people you trust. Right, and people with similar interests. You're going to found your group. You're going to come up with a business plan, right? And you're going to come up with some tech that you think can match it, right? And then you're going to start looking for friends and family investment. So you're going to call your friends and try and get them to put in $1,000 each, or $5,000 each, and build up maybe $150,000. From that $150K, you're going to try and build your first product or your first service or your first almost product or almost service. You want to get far enough along in the tech track that you can attract a serious investor. For some companies, and I'll say Fleet Space is a really good example from the satellite side. They decided not to build the spacecraft with their investment. They decided to do analysis of their mission and get their regulatory approvals, right? So they went and got their frequency spectrum approval done first. And in order to do that, they had to design their 100 satellite constellation. So they hired us to design the constellation, and we brought in another supplier to do their spectrum allocation. And the report that was written, they took to a VC investor as evidence that they can make that there was a large market and that their team was the team that could do it. So the investor will look at you and say, do you have a good team? Can I work with you as an individual? If you're the smartest person in the room, but you're a pain in the ass, you won't make money, right? But if you're a reasonable person to work with, then they'll work with you. And that's called your Series A investment, that first 5 million. And the people who make 5 million want to know that you could either sell product at the end of that 5 million, or that you could raise 20 million to get to that product, right? And that's called a Series B. So every round they add a letter, and they also add a 0 to the end of it, right? And your value, the value of your company goes higher when you do that. It's a bit of a Ponzi scheme. No, honestly, it is. The investors that put their money into your business early on, when you make that next round, will decide, do they want to stick it out, or do they want to cash out and get their return on their investment? And as long as your valuation increases every level, then your investors are happy, because when they cash out, they could buy a car, they could do whatever they want with their investment. So that's how the game works. Saber didn't get any investment. We bootstrapped. So we made a little bit of money off of customers, used that as evidence to go for bigger customers. Then we ended up getting customers like the fleet spaces and things like that. Oh, by the way, you've got state grants. So you have MVP grants, which is like 25K, right? So that's good for a friends and family round. So you raise 25K from your friends and family, use that as the matching funding for a 25K New South Wales grant, and now you got 50K to play with. And what are you going to spend it on? Hopefully setting the conditions to raise that seed funding, 250K. We can really start paying yourselves and doing things. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. I could talk forever on that. I gotta close it off all I can.
Where do you see Saber in the next 5-10 years? Do you see yourselves changing your sort of direction?
I don't know. 10 years is a long time to look out. Although we have stuck roughly to the business plan that we originally came up with. We told people we're going to do these things, and we did these things. We are gravitating less towards building really cool algorithms and more towards operations as a service. Within 5 years, we are very likely going to be the space traffic company that people go to manage it. Bit of a pitfall with me saying that, because we don't know what the government's going to do. It's kind of like 1922 for air traffic. That's what space traffic is. And a lot of companies are trying to be the company to do that at the moment. Right now, Saber is running space traffic for the Pacific region in these exercises that the U.S. military put together. So we're kind of in a zone where we could do that, and we could do that through the Mission Control Center in Adelaide. All right, so that could happen. What I'm seeing in the market is a lot of companies are building spacecraft, but they're vertically integrating, which means that if you buy this widget, it only fits within the rest of this. Kind of like Apple versus the Apple versus Windows problem. So we are flirting with the idea of building spacecraft ourselves. We would be a little bit late to the party if we did that. But at the end of the day, Saber right now is 40 employees on 2 continents. We fully see ourselves as a 100-person company. It could happen within 3 years. It could happen very quickly. Once you hit, you're asking a question about starting a business. You start with a bunch of friends, and then you get some wins, and you have to hire people. Okay, then you're going to grow to 12 people, and the path from 12 people to 40 is really quick. Really, it's like a year. For us, it was within a year. I turned around, I'm meeting people I'd never met in my own company, and it's like, well, who are you? Yeah, actually, it was great. I walked into our U.S. lab, because we've got 2 labs in the U.S. We have 1 lab in the U.S. and an integration team in Colorado Springs, right? I walked into a meeting in Colorado Springs, and I had a whole bunch of Saberoonies sitting around a table, and they're half the faces I'd never met. And I go and I sit down, and I start talking, and I don't normally dress this nice, socks and sandals, right? Pretty dressed down kind of guy. And one guy looks at me and was like, "I'm sorry, it's a private meeting. Who are you?" And I was just like, what do you say to that? It's like, well, probably someone you might want to know. But It'll happen overnight, right? Once you get that first block, that snowballs really quickly. So in 5 years, I don't want us to grow too big, but I do see us being a 100-person company pretty quickly.
What's the difference between what kind of workloads you guys do here compared to the US?
Great question. Great question. It's kind of like, you ever see Ghostbusters?
I actually haven't.
All right, look up, you young people! All right, each Saber is its own company. The Australian Saber does not own the American Saber. The American Saber does not own the Australian Saber. It's by design. Each company, each laboratory runs research and development that fit the needs of that national strategic path. So for Australia, it's very much about building entrepreneurialism and supporting the democratization of space, and that's a common theme across both. The Australian projects have built Piggy and Taro and those kind of SOAR mission control software tools. And we do a bit of work for Australian Defence in making telescopes that can track objects in space, but these telescopes are very small, so you could buy them as hobby students, and when you see a spacecraft, it automatically goes back to our database of space objects.
Okay.
So trying to democratize space traffic that way. All the machine learning tech was made in Australia, right? And we use that pretty much globally. So we're diagnosing the health of spacecraft. So that the Boeing satellite that we did at the end of last year was purely an Australian project. On the U.S. side, most of the work has been for U.S. DoD for Space Force. So converting the software that you see downstairs into something that could fit on their special super secret squirrel servers has been most of the effort. Although we did do work turning Piggy into a virtual reality tool, which is good. Like if you have multiple operation centers, you can talk to each other inside the space and say, look, you see that spacecraft? There's a problem on that spacecraft. And so you pull the spacecraft to you and you all pull it apart and look at it kind of like that, and you're doing these kind of things. It's really fun. We're going to ramp that up in the States, I think. We are doing some project work for NASA with an Australian product that is being the core of a drag sail. So the Australian product we made is a deorbit tether, right? So it unfurls like a yo-yo. We did some parabolic flights for it. NASA gave us some money to turn that into a drag sail. So it's kind of like a product within a product, where that makes any sense. So where we're going to go with that is a service where we can attach that dragon to the bottom of a piece of debris and drag it back down to Earth at the end of its life, things like that. Where we're going with this, kind of related to your question, as a service, and that's the big effort of mine is to try and concatenate the two Sabers together, in terms of culture, in terms of what we're doing, and that's hard when you're working on two different types of customers. Yeah, that's the space operations as a service. The operations center that we built in Adelaide has actually been an operations program Saber's had since 2014.
Yeah.
We flew our first satellite in 2015, which was one of these Kickstarter companies out of California. And the Boulder, Colorado lab has got a mission control center, not as glamorous as the one in Adelaide, because that's a good chunk of cash spent on that, but just as functional. And we're going to be able to do follow the sun operations. So 8 hours of ops for our operations customers, then pass the ball back to the Australians, and then they do it. So it's kind of like day watch, night watch kind of thing. So that's what we do. Yeah.
All right, we have some very specific academic questions in the comments. So Chad says, I'm doing a mechanical engineering/science double degree, but I'm sure what to pick for the science component. In terms of the space industry, what would you recommend as a science major?
Get questions like this a lot. People are trying to optimize themselves for what they think the space industry needs rather than their own passion. And to Chad, I would say, what is your passion? If your passion is computer science and you love coding, do that. If your passion is physics, you could do space weather, or you can do things which are more related to mission design. It's really up to you. I would say Saber doesn't hire a lot of mechanical engineers today. We might need to in the next 3 years. And that's been a bit of a frustration because we get a CV that says SolidWorks and ANSYS. We don't have any job openings where we need SolidWorks and ANSYS. But Gilmore's a different story. They're exactly the opposite. They got a dozen opportunities for people who are good at SolidWorks and ANSYS. But they don't really need computer science people, right? So, don't worry about it. Get a good degree, pick what you love, and then look for who needs that thing that you love. You could be much happier at the end of the day.
Okay. Nick asked, what would you recommend aspiring aerospace engineers to do when they are off campus or abroad for the time being to gain more experience or prepare for future employment?
I love that. I love that. Do your own projects. Do your own fun. Look. This is the thing. Like, again, back to when I was in that mud pit in Bosnia, I had no skills. I learned on my own, gathered up enough skills to be useful, and then entered the industry. And because I was doing it on my own, I was actually learning faster than in the university. It depends on where your headspace is a little bit on that one. But I would say when we get applicants and the student has, we get some applicants who say, hey, I'm the team leader for this project, I'm the team leader for this, team leader for this, and they show like all these student groups. I think, it's a shame. They want to do leadership. Maybe they want to do marketing someday or project management. But when I get an applicant that says, here's a project I did at home, I wrote an orbital mechanics engine in Unity on my spare time, I'm like, yeah, that's a person I want to hire. That's a tinkerer, that's a builder, right? So stick to the projects you love, kind of like what I was suggesting to Chad, but do some of these projects on the side. Like if you love rockets, get your own Leslie's model rocket kit, start launching them yourself, bring some friends, see what the main issues are. Start doing your own design work for your own type of stuff. Do your own projects, your own thing. Try and find out what are the gaps in human knowledge, right? It's fun. It's fun finding out what us silver hairs are doing wrong. I could list a dozen things I'm doing wrong, but see if you could find out ways that, hey, if be the inventor on your own, and come up with your own ideas.
All right. Billy asks, hi, I was wondering if there is opportunity in industry for those in the physics and math space. I think it's pretty similar.
Yeah. Maths depends on the type of math. If you're really good at linear algebra, I would say, is it you? Or do you hate that? I said, if you're really good at linear algebra, then most of spacecraft attitude determination and control, the ADCS subsystem, very heavy in linear algebra. Robotics, if you're a roboticist, and again, tying it into your question, very similar. And if you're a video game engineer, this is the thing. Like we had video game engineers sitting next to space engineers, and they were really holding their own because all of the matrix mathematics that you're doing for linear algebra fits attitude control and estimation. Probability theory is another one. Kalman filtering, things like that. The physics types questions. Space weather is an easy entry point. I say easy with a grain of salt. Start thinking in terms of whether you want to be a PhD researcher or a space engineer. These are different paths. They do diverge after a few years, but that's, again, kind of up to you. Does that answer that question okay? Okay.
Yeah, it was
all right. Feel free to follow up if you need to comment again.
Yeah. He currently says, I study electronics and comp sci and have interest in robotics. Seems like rover development isn't what you'd recommend. However, I aspire to build rovers for lunar resource economies in decades to come. When would you project ISRU infrastructure to be developed for the lunar surface?
All right, I gotta backtrack on my own comment now, and maybe give better context, because it's an unfair thing to say that if you're doing rovers, you're not doing space. It's a very unfair thing to say. I said it because what I didn't want to happen is I didn't want people to pick rovers because they think it's easier. and because you think you can't do satellites or you can't do other things. So yes, absolutely, if you want to do rovers for resource extraction and things like this, absolutely do it. Absolutely do it. I don't want to hold you back from that at all.
And he asks, could Australian industry provide meaningful experience regarding this, or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I look, Hikari, I did a robotics PhD. I went to the Australian Centre for Field Robotics. That's where I went. I was surrounded by people who said, you cannot do space. All of the professors there, and I knew different. So for me, it wasn't a big deal because I knew different. But for all the professors there, were telling me, just do rovers instead. You can't do space. That's why I was pushing away from it. But the expertise in rovers is world class. Australia is top 3 in the world every year, consistently, for decades on robotics. You're going to get world-class robotics at this task. The time to do ISRU is by the time you get done with your training, you're going to be spot on. Like right now, we're only a couple of years away, right? So learning rovers, if you're passionate about rovers and ISRU and you love it, go for it. If you're doing a rover, I will say you are not going to be doing asteroid mining. Okay, you're going to be doing lunar mining. Totally cool, totally fine, but just make sure that you understand what you want to do. Okay, if you want to have space infrastructure, then build space infrastructure. If you want to do rovers, you can apply that rover for the lunar surface with only a few tweaks in how you do that. It's not a big stretch to do that. Australia is, I would say, the best place in the world for that. United States would be a second. Korea and Japan are probably not on the list. France would be third on the list. So of the top 3 robotics labs in the world, number 1 is the Australian Centre for Field Robotics. It's literally 200 meters away from here. The second best would be Carnegie Mellon in the United States, and the third would be LAS out of Toulouse, France. Right, those are the top 3 I would recommend. They swap out every year, right? One year one gets high. The year I was there, we were third. I was like, oh, only third, but nobody cares, right? Yeah, a lot of good programs out there, and you can absolutely do it here. All right, valuable life lessons. Okay, can you read that? No. Just showing some love from Darren. Thanks, Darren.
Darren says, valuable life lessons presented here. Passion is key. Attitude is always more important than your degree. Knowledge can be gained over time. Experiment and build, make mistakes, move fast and fail fast. At the end of the day, you learn the most life lessons in your uni projects. Do any space project. Spacecraft and rockets is better.
I don't want to say, look, Saber does ops, right? So I'm not building spacecraft or rockets, right? So we do operations. Part of that's my own kind of passion. We have a few products which are space, like satellite-related products. But at the end of the day, that's the holy trinity of space: is satellites, rockets, and ops. Okay, that's the holy trinity of space. Those 3 things. Everything else is part of the story. And you're free to do what you want to do, right? That's really the lesson I'm trying to say. Fail fast. It's okay to fail is the lesson. I don't know if fail fast is the lesson. Some people, and I'm not saying that's how Darren's saying it here, some investors would say fail fast because they give up too soon. If you're doing space as a business, you have any business is going to take years. Facebook took 5 years to get off the ground. Yeah. So I wouldn't recommend fail fast, but I would recommend be comfortable with making mistakes. Be comfortable, learn from the mistakes and move on. Rather than give up. Like I should have given up at Saber years ago. In fact, I told you my wife was paying the bills at the house for years, And it got to that point in 2012, 2014, she had an iron skillet. Saying, time to get a job, husband, get a job. So I started teaching at UNSW, which is the worst thing I ever did. I love you, UNSW. Don't be an adjunct lecturer, don't do it. You know, I sold my house, right, to pay the bills. That's what I ended up doing. And I stuck it out a few more years. All I had to do was stick it out 2 more years, we started making money. Okay, and now look, we're doing all these things, right? And so fail fast, I take with a grain of salt. Everything else on that list, Darren, props, grateful, very grateful to help you guys out. So, all right.
What's the same with iron propulsion in Australia? Is it really prevalent, or since most university professors don't really go into it in depth? How is it in Australia?
Really good. It's niche. Some places are excellent at it. UNSW, is it ANU? I think it's ANU Canberra. ANU Canberra's got one of the top propulsion, ion drive propulsion labs in the world. We tested our electrodynamic tether up the back end of the nozzle because it's showing plasma out the back end. Hall effect thrusters, they do some good work there. So I rate them. I'd rate them in the top 10. Nowhere else in Australia really does them. So if that's your feeling, then go to ANU in Canberra. If you can't make it there, then look at Princeton in New Jersey, in the United States. Actually, better than that. Princeton's really good with the physics. University of Michigan.
Michigan, I was gonna say.
Oh yeah, do you know these? You
Yes.
interested in iDrive?
Yeah, yeah.
Their work is awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, no, I get all gushy when I talk about like UMich.
Me too.
Because they're making ion drive propulsion engines with some pretty decent thrust. These like actually 5 Newton thrust on an ion drive engine. You just like, wow, you know, who does that? So yeah, I mean maybe you can do some work here and try and figure out what they're doing and come up with. That's what I mean, coming up with something new. You see what other people are doing and you could follow, build on the shoulders of giants, or you could say, all right, let's come up with something really new and interesting.
Did you catch the Ingenuity flight last night?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I didn't. I know. My staff was like showing videos and all excited. I gotta look at it later. But I was catching up on sleep last night. Yeah. Okay. Is that enough? Have we reached the end of the
I
question?
have one more question. Who are the actual customers in space right now? Because traditionally, I think of like in the past we just sell to like NASA or.
We've never sold to NASA. Australia's never sold to NASA. NASA cannot buy an Australian product, not without going through significant hoops. Australians, we need to buy and sell from each other. And that's starting to happen. Fleet and Gilmore are buying stuff from each other. Spacecraft manufacturers are not yet buying from each other. They're two very vertically integrated. So it's still early days. But the customers right now are people who are trying to build spacecraft. Right now, the Australian market has got a whole bunch of people who have built really good payloads. So here, I made a really cool camera at CSIRO. I'm going to sell that to someone. That's kind of what I'm seeing a lot of. But in 2 to 5 years, that's all going to be different, right? You all are going to graduate, create your new space companies, and build your own satellites to do stuff, or a rover if you want to do a rover, or your own Saber Astronautics style operation center if you want to do that. And the customers are going to be people who fly spacecraft, right? That's who the customers are going to be.
How about like the data endpoints, like in agriculture or people using communication services?
They're definitely a customer, but the companies that decided to go from 2 years ago, by the time you guys graduate, are going to capture a pretty good chunk of that market. I don't know, maybe that's a bit unfair. You can, so they're legitimate customers, so you could build a company to go for that. in a saturated market. The strategy for doing something really risky and new, like I'm a high risk kind of person, right? Talk ion drive engines to me, and I'm in. I want to make the next ion drive engine and commercialize that and get it out the door. I love that. It's, actually, ion drive engines today are medium risk, okay? It's because people have done them enough that they work, right? If you're in that really low risk state where people, this is where people who push you into doing UAVs make the mistake. They're like, oh, just do UAVs and eventually make a satellite. But those who build the roads set the toll for everybody else. So if you're going to enter that market where you're doing like hyperspectral cameras and you're doing, counting the cars at Walmart and the downstream services market, it's showing some signs of saturation. That means you have to come in with an innovative business model and innovative price points and new ways to reach the customers. And that means your operation solution has to be something different and unique when you're doing that. So you can't actually go for them. And they're a huge chunk of the market, right? Right now, I'd say people are making a lot of money doing things like that. New comment from Darren. Daza!
I stole Facebook's motto, they believe in move fast, fail fast. Agree in corporations, professional business, failure is bad. But as students, failure is a part of the process of learning. Don't fear failure, only keep trying and persevere. BlueSat is a great place to learn. Thank you, Darren.
Yep. 100%. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be afraid of failure. In fact, for businesses, you can't be afraid of failure either, is kind of what I was trying to say. Maybe not very eloquently, but I agree with you, Darren. Okay? Cool.
How is P and Tarot sort of non-traditional in the sense of mission operations software with regards to like other missions that have been running? Is it different to how, say, conventional space operations have been done?
Not at all.
Really?
Not at all. Traditional space has been a hodgepodge of bespoke tools built by people who want to look smart. And when you want to look smart, you make your tool to look as complicated as possible. So you have to be smart in order to use it. And the training times would be like 6 months to 12 months, right? And very text-based interfaces, and it's like the Matrix, right? And if you want to control something in the Matrix, man, that person's brilliant, and it doesn't really work. The U.S. was interesting talking to the military because their complaints were like, well, our duty posting is 2 years. If you're in the military, you've got a 2-year duty posting, 4 years at the most. And you're going to spend 6 months of that time learning the tools. It's stupid. So we said we're going to turn this into a video game, and it's going to be easy to do. And we measured it, and we turned their training time down from 6 months to just a couple of days. And the demo project was trained up in 45 minutes. Right, so if we used to do these conferences like we would have a booth and our competitor would be here, and our competitor would have another booth, which is a company who makes money to train people how to use our competitor's product, right? And I don't want to call them out, just because it's not how I want to roll, but you're just like, why do you need all that? Why do you need a whole company whose job it is to train your product? When you could just take a video game, anybody with a video game is going to log on, is going to download the software and start playing it, and you'll have like a train up in the game, kind of things like that. So another thing with bespoke is you got about a dozen tools that you have that got to work together. So you'll have dish control, diagnostics, overpass calcs, customers, all these different things that you got to do to run a mission. And we said we want to have one tool, that's Piggy, where you can do just about anything you can to run that mission. And we almost made it. We ended up with like 3 tools. Okay, we got Piggy, we got the Tarot product, which I want to merge in the Piggy. Tarot is just a free tool to get you all engaged. You could look at the stuff yourself using Tarot without spending money. And the third bit is a mission management board where you could track the to-do list. It's really all it is, a to-do list, right? And it's a Kanban board essentially. And that's it. Those are the three tools that we have. And it's easy to use, and that's how we're able to control, hundreds of satellites with one little operations center of 8 people in Adelaide. When every other company that was applying for that contract was putting in the usual, and they were saying, here's all the flight heritage this has, and look at how complex it is. It's a really good tool because it's really hard to use. They weren't saying that, but that's kind of the impression that you get. So that's it. Are we there? 2 minutes left. 2 minutes.
I was thinking of bringing in Taofiq now.
Bring Taofiq.
Yeah.
Meet one of the successful Wolfpackers, UNSW grad, BlueSat grad.
Yeah.
Also.
Let's give a round of applause to Jason first.
Hands and finger guns.
2 more minutes.
Okay.
You can recall something.
Two more minutes. 2 more minutes in heaven.
Is it pretty hard to interface like ordered satellites? I'm sure that are all these different technical demands and requirements. Is it hard to sort of like input all those control features into the software?
It's a bit bespoke still, but right now we've got, and the companies that manufacture the satellites don't want to give us the commands because they want to keep all that themselves. But right now we've got commands for Kubos, and Kubos is an open source flight software tool. So the flight software on the Kubos spacecraft, if you do commands in there, we can do that. We also have, this might be useful for all of you, we have an open source space operations toolkit that we are releasing under another Australian grant. This is one of the ISIs that they announced. So all of our infrastructure, so if you make your own spacecraft yourselves, you can, or even a rover, if you want to continue with a rover, you could use our open source infrastructure to connect your satellite to our operations center. So that covers a whole bunch of the pain that most people get trying to figure out how do I do command data handling, and we'll teach you how to use it, right? So it makes it easier. Yep. Okay. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I have to eat.
Yeah.
I have to eat. So thank you, everybody. Good luck with your futures.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
Sweetie says you I still like the he's going.
Any immediate feedback?
Great.
Great.
I heard some very specific questions.
He expects to be roasted so hard, but he's like, no, you're elite.
Guapa rule. Guapa not the wall.
Okay, so do you guys like all study aero?
Physics and mechatronics.
Let's
It's Tony talking.
Yeah.
Alright, head to the prize.
Alright, hello everyone. So let's start with Spiral Blue story, I guess.
Yeah.
Alright, sit down. Yeah, I'll stand in for this. So Spiral Blue started the company sort of in late 2017.
Oh, sorry, this is Taofiq, by the way.
Oh, hi everyone. So I started Spiral Blue sort of in late 2017. The goal was always to use space technology to improve life on Earth, with an eye towards colonizing or settling other planets, but starting with the Earth first. And so the area of focus for us is very much Earth observation, which was the sort of obvious thing for us. Communications is, I don't know if anyone here is studying communications, but if you do, you're essentially a dark mage. I do not understand how any of that works, so good on you. So we're doing Earth observation, so satellite imaging of the Earth's surface from space. And so those images are used in a variety of industries, including defense, agriculture, city planning, financial services, mining, etc., etc. So what we do at Spiral Blue is actually identify a problem with Earth observation satellites, in that they take these images of the Earth, and then these images are actually quite large, and they have to send down the whole image back to the Earth through the very sort of narrow downlinks that they have. And then only when it's on the Earth can it then be processed into a format that's actually useful for a client, such as defense or anyone else. So we figured that if we were able to do the processing on the satellite could then actually return much more processed data rather than raw data. So that's what we're doing. We're building the Space Edge computer, which will hopefully be going up in sort of June to July timeframe. We should have 3 of those going up on 3 satellites, so fingers crossed. These things have been delayed before, they'll probably be delayed again, but we're trying to get as many launches booked as we can to try and mitigate that. And then a couple more in December, and then looking at a few more early next year as well. So in addition to that, we're developing the Space Edge Services platform, which is for anyone that wants to actually access the Space Edge computers to actually get access to satellite images, either raw or processed. So trying to do that fairly easily. To give you an idea, currently to purchase a satellite image can take multiple weeks of talking to a sales rep, persuading them that you're a legitimate company, then trying to get an invoice from them, and finally once you pay probably thousands and thousands of dollars, they send you the satellite image in an email or some other old-timey format. So yeah, there's a lot of modernization that needs to be done with satellite imaging. So that's what we're trying to do. And on the other side of things, we're also doing the processing itself of the satellite images. So we are actually building apps that could actually either run on the satellite or on the ground to be able to process satellite images for clients. So on that side, we have Vessel Detect, which is for maritime surveillance. And we also have Canopy Mapper, which is more for forestry and city planning and those sorts of applications. So yeah, that's the company. Currently there's about 9 of us in total. So we are steadily growing, and we are, as you've probably seen on our website, if you've looked, we're trying to get more people on board. So if you know currently we're hiring for a software engineer and business development intern. So if you know anyone that's good, please send them our way. Our biggest constraint at the moment is getting the right people on board. So it's not funding. If you do the right thing and you do it well, funding is not a problem. That's what I've done. The much bigger problem is getting the right people, and obviously also getting our tech into space. That's a massive problem. So yeah, that's us. I guess we can probably do some Q&A.
So like, when did you start working on this? Like, come up with the first idea, and then really trying to apply yourself to it.
When did I start working on it, and when did I start applying myself?
Yeah.
So in late 2017, I started looking at the idea sort of as like a part-time sort of thing. So around that time, I started a PhD as well, so that was supposed to be the main focus. The PhD was terrible, so I just kept on working on the startup more and more and more. I took some time off from the PhD, and then in that time I checked, well, could I actually work on a startup full-time? And the answer was unequivocally yes. And so around that time I brought on my first co-founder, Dr. Henry Zhou, who's handling the AI side of things. And we sort of worked on it for a bit, did some contract applications, and then early, sort of like second quarter of 2019, I decided to end the PhD and just focus on Spiral Blue just by itself. So sort of since 2019, we've been working on it like fully full-time.
Is there anything you wish you had known going into uni? Any particular courses you wish you had paid more attention in?
Well, uni did not really prepare me for anything that I'm doing right now, so I probably would have not done aerospace engineering at UNSW. Yeah, I'm so sorry to everyone. Like something like mechatronics, which is a bit more generalized, you know, you get more of a mix of all the different types of engineering would be more useful. Because there's nothing stopping someone not doing aerospace from doing space stuff. Anyone can do space stuff. But aerospace itself is like 99% aero, and then like a little bit of space added to the side. So it's at least at UNSW. Other universities may be different, but yeah, so that was my experience at uni, wishing I had done a different degree. Yeah.
This one's a little bit of a two-parter. So just to want to get a bit more understanding, I guess, what the advantage of, I guess, doing processing like on board is, because as opposed to beaming down, as you say, a ton of data, right? To get usable insights out of it, I'm just like, don't you also need like a lot of data beamed down once you do the processing?
Yeah.
And also the second one is like, what challenges have, I guess, you faced non-funding related as a founder, I guess, in the early days of startup work?
So the advantage, we do still need to bring down a large amount of raw data, just because there are many applications that do need access to the raw data on the ground, because we still do need people to look at data in many cases. But for a lot of the more automated things, it is very much you can just automate it and you're done. And so the advantage of those applications is if we were to run those more on the edge, the amount of I guess bits that need to be returned per square kilometer covered is much lower. So like the ultimate sort of example is if someone just wants to know how many ships are in Sydney Harbour, right? Today you would have to get the image. The image could be quite large and would set you back many thousands of dollars to purchase. And so what you would then have to do is then spend hours and hours going through the image, like counting all the ships yourself, right? So if we have something like Vessel Detect running on the edge, what we can do is if someone asks how many ships are in Sydney Harbour, we can just send down a number. So that frees up the bandwidth for better applications. Yeah. And so for that reason, it would also be a hell of a lot cheaper.
Who are your like primary customers right now? Like trying to like get you to do all this shit for you?
The primary customers.
Yeah.
So at the moment, a lot of it is self-driven because the algorithm side of the business is sort of a customer for the space edge side of the business. But we also have some customers that want to upload their own apps to the edge as well. So we have one called Actuary, who I'd love to mention. They're working with Grain Corp, and they want to use our technology to be able to map what areas of, I think it was regional New South Wales, have what amount of temporary grain storage. So the thing with grain storage is that often it's just grain just not put in silos or anything, it's just piled out outside, and you can just see it in the satellites, like, oh yeah, there we go, there's a pile of grain there, right? So from there you can, if you know what the inventory is of grain in a certain area in certain areas across New South Wales, you can start to predict the prices of what grain will be.
I think we didn't answer the second part of this
No,
question.
Oh, yes.
I was just asking, I guess, someone interested, I guess, in like startups and small, founding, like what other sort of early stage challenges you've sort of encountered in like founding like your own business, I guess, outside of the funding side, just like.
Yeah. Well, I will. So the funding side was much more early on. So I will say that.
Actually, yeah.
So a lot of it did come from my own savings.
Okay.
And then my parents also supported me. So that's an underappreciated thing. If you have a good relationship with your parents, you have a very unfair advantage compared to everyone else. So I will highlight that. The other part, but the biggest challenge was definitely getting the right people early on. So I was very lucky to find Henry. He was working like part-time in other companies while in the early days. But he never even considered leaving, and he probably would have got a job at Google or something like that, but he never really even considered it. So that was fantastic, and James has been great as well. Just finding the right people at the right time is the biggest challenge.
Huge, thank you.
I recall in your AIAA webinar like a couple of months back, you mentioned like you had issues looking at how to give off your heat from your computer. Did you manage to solve some of those issues?
Well, maybe. We'll see. So part of the problem is on the first two satellites, because they are like CubeSats, really small. They themselves don't have enough power to keep us going for long enough for heat to be a problem. So we found that I think we can run about 40 minutes per day at the moment, and in that time it is nowhere near the thermal maximum. Yeah.
How do you deal with competitors, I guess, like Nearmap kind of?
Oh, we destroyed them. No.
Yeah.
No, Nearmap is not really competitive to us.
Oh, okay. I would assume because like aerial imaging.
Yeah, they're very different applications.
I see.
But in general, we just, competitors are always great because they give us information on what the market actually wants. And beyond that, we can always learn. There's nothing stopping us from learning from their own successes and failures as well.
When you were starting the startup, did you have any other ideas to explore, or was it mainly driven towards observation?
Yeah, well, actually, there were many ideas. So the first startup idea I looked at, I actually brought it to Jason back in the day, was for bushfire detection from space. And as you would know, there are now many startups that are doing that. For I don't know, there's a certain reason why. I wouldn't be able to say why, but I have my theories. So in addition to that, I was for a while doing a startup called Lunar Letter, which I started. And so the idea with that was, at the time, the Google Lunar X Prize was looking like someone might win it. So the idea was to go to someone like Astrobotic or any of the other prize participants, and basically you can buy like a small slot on any of those spacecraft, particularly the Astrobotic ones, for a few $100s. So I figured, like, if I have this much volume to put in a spacecraft, I could put a micro SD card on it and fill that card with just people's like messages or photos or videos and that kind of thing. So, you know, sold a few letters to do that, but after a few months I was sort of like, wow, this is a terrible business idea. Do I really want to be doing this for 10 plus years? And the answer was very much no, so that's why I moved on and started Spiral Blue.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of, I guess, space imaging going? Like, where do you see some, like, I guess, maybe innovation targets starting to emerge soon?
So something that we'd love to do personally is, and I think there was recently an announcement from Airbus on this, is currently, you know, the satellite images an area, then it flies around and has to go to the ground station to downlink. So there's a lot of interest right now in setting up inter-satellite links to be able to just send the data immediately to another satellite that then sends it to the ground. So that's something that we're personally quite interested in, because then what we could do is put our space edge computers, instead of necessarily just putting them on the satellite that's collecting the images, we could also put some of the computers on the inter-satellite, or the inter-satellite link satellites, or the relay satellites, I guess is a better way to put it, and essentially turn it into a giant space-based server. So that would be super cool for us. And so I'm still trying to find the right partner that could actually host us for something like that, but we'd love to do that. And so the benefit there would be that we could take data from a whole different bunch of Earth observation satellites, combine it into something really interesting, and then just send that down.
That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Yes. Space server, like.
Yeah, we're gonna try to mine Bitcoin on that.
Start your own crypto.
Well, yeah, let's just say our investors are pushing us in that direction. To date, I've been resisting.
What do you find your biggest challenges? What's limiting your power or your I guess capability? Is it mechanical design, space considerations, algorithms?
It is very much power at the moment. Power and just interfacing. So with the first few satellites we're putting up, the links inside the satellite themselves are actually slower than the link back to the ground.
Wow.
So I think because the satellite wasn't originally built to take us into account, so that's why that's been a problem. In the future, that shouldn't be a problem. In the future, we should have pretty good like gigabit Ethernet inside the satellite to be able to take data around wherever it needs to go. But at the moment, that is a pretty big problem. And then after that would very much be power. And then once power is sorted, thermal is going to be a problem. Yeah. So it just keeps going.
And are these satellites that are like, they were going up into space, they were going to be Earth observation satellites, and they're like, oh, we wouldn't mind this space age computer.
Pretty much.
Sweet.
Yeah. Well, for the first few, the first one that we tried to put up, it was actually, we were trying to find like a hosted payload provider. So the great thing is nowadays there are many companies that rather than having to launch your own CubeSat or your own satellite, you can just make a payload and they will put your payload on their own satellite. So if you guys have any interest in just building something to put into space, that's actually a fairly easy and affordable way to do it, because they will walk you through the whole process of how to interface it, how to do all that sort of stuff. And it's also fairly affordable, much more affordable compared to like a CubeSat or something. So a CubeSat would probably set you back more than 100 grand in just the parts. And then on top of that, the operations, everything else could add up to easily $500,000, right? Whereas for a hosted payload, you could do it for as little as, sorry, when I say dollars, I mean US dollars, so keep that in mind. So a hosted payload could be done for as little as 25,000 US dollars. So that's much more in the range of what a university group or someone could actually personally afford. Much cheaper than starting like Jason's example is the Boost Juice franchise, right? Way cheaper than doing that. So I forget what you originally asked, but basically what I'm saying is hosted payloads are great. And so yeah, originally we were looking for someone to do a hosted payload for us. And so we shopped around more than a dozen places. So we used the platform SatSearch. So highly recommend you try to using that if you're looking for any sort of space products or services. And through the platform, we got introductions to maybe about a dozen suppliers. Most of them were like, oh yeah, you want to launch something that's like this big and like this like CubeSat size, but something like a quarter of a U. It'll cost you like $200,000 or $500,000. So there was basically no benefit in flying with them rather than just building our own satellite. But there were a few suppliers that were more sort of in the lower cost range, and ultimately we went with Sat Revolution because it just so happened that they were doing hosted payloads, but their main goal as a company was actually to do Earth observation. So it just turned into a really great partnership.
Alright, cool, is that everyone? Alright, I guess we could start wrapping it up then, I won't waste that one. Do you need to get back to work or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's give Taofiq a round of applause.
Thank you for the great questions, everyone. SpiralBlue.space/careers. See ya.
Thank you.
Alright. Yeah, I'll probably leave it on. Yeah, once I say goodbye to the live stream people, we should just head off. Someone else can do it.
Mark in Jason's office.
Yeah, you end the thing. Yeah. See you guys. Live stream's over.